It is another week in the National Football League. 3 weeks to go before the postseason. 2 weeks to go in the fantasy football world. So a lot to cover as we roll on this show today. Let's begin with Thursday Night Football. Just a couple hours from now, it'll be the Denver Broncos taking on the LA Chargers. Chargers favored by 3 points in this game. Total is between 40.5 and 41.5. This is such an interesting football game. You have Denver, who is tied for the top wildcard spot right now. They are not going to catch the Chiefs for the division. Kansas City wrapped that up. So Denver is competing for a wildcard spot. They're probably locked into it at this point. The Chargers also feel pretty comfortable, I would say, in a wildcard spot right now at 8-6, 1 game back of the Denver Broncos after Denver's somehow miraculous comeback against the Indianapolis Colts last week. I think both of these teams kind of set up the same way. And I don't know if a whole lot separates them. That's why we're at the 3 points right now. I think when you look at it, Denver's defense, a little bit better than the Chargers defense. But I think the Chargers offense, when everything is rolling, the Chargers offense is a little bit better than the Broncos offense. So I think this is going to be a very interesting chess match. And I think a lot of times Thursday night games do come down to better coaching. And while I have been acknowledging my stubbornness on Sean Payton and trying to get better about it, I do still think Harbaugh is a better coach. And so I do think that the Chargers get the job done in this game. So I'm going to go LA minus the 3 points. From a fantasy standpoint, you don't love many of the options in this game. I feel like there are, in a fantasy semifinal, a lot of better options at the quarterback spot than Nix and Herbert this week, based on the defenses that they are going to be facing. In the run game, on the Chargers side, Vidal is probably the better of the two running backs, but he's not getting the workload. And Edwards isn't all that great. And then Denver's run defense quite good. Denver, the volume is very unpredictable. No matter who is in that backfield, who's hurt, who's not, the volume is unpredictable, so it's very tough to land on any of them. At wide receiver, Ladd McConkey has been consistent and fine. I think you can roll with him, but aside from that, it feels like a big roll of the dice. But then also, both defenses, when you're looking at it from a fantasy standpoint, are facing offenses that are just good enough that you don't feel awesome about it. So it all feels like it all cancels itself out, and you're not overly confident starting anyone in fantasy football in this game this week. We go to Saturday, where it is the Houston Texans taking on the Kansas City Chiefs. Kansas City favored by 3.5. Again, your total is between 40 and 41.5. This is going to drive people crazy, because I think a lot of people, spread-wise, have been fading the Kansas City Chiefs for a little bit now, but I also think people have been fading the Houston Texans for a bit, given how disappointing their season has been. And Mahomes is healthy, full participant in practice, so Mahomes is good to go. They are also getting Hollywood Brown back, which I think is a really interesting wrinkle in this game. The one part of this that I think is really going to give Houston problems is Kansas City's run defense is quite good. And the only time Houston's really been able to move the ball is when Joe Mixon has been the one kind of carrying things for that team. So I do think that this is a matchup that is really, really bad for Houston, because they are the Chiefs are really good at taking away number one passing options, and then they are also very good at taking away the run game, and those are the two big things that the Texans rely on. Now, it's two big things most teams rely on, but Houston specifically, they really need Collins to be able to bust a couple, and they really need Mixon to be able to power through, and I just don't think you can do that here against Kansas City. And so while I have great concern about actually clicking on this one, just for the purposes of what we do here with a pick per game, we're going to go Kansas City minus the 3.5. From a fantasy standpoint, again, like you are in a spot here in the semifinals. If you are here, you're probably here because of Joe Mixon. So it would be very difficult to not trust him at this point. I think you do, just because of how good he has been. You just have to hope that he finds his way into the end zone or something along those lines, and you have to roll with him for this game. And Nico Collins, again, I think Kansas City's very good at taking guys away, but I think Nico Collins is just too good to have sitting on your bench in the fantasy semifinals. Toxic. I have Joe Mixon in both leagues. Yeah, man, I have him in one league, and it is just killing me, that decision, because it's like you look at a couple options, like, man, that matchup's better, but he has been so good this year. I don't know how you sit him. I think there's some difficulty in what you do with, honestly, I don't think you trust either quarterback in this game. And I think there is some difficulty in what you do with the Kansas City run game with Pacheco, because I think the Texans are a pretty good run defense as well, and Pacheco hasn't exactly balled out. So I would have concerns about rolling with him this week. And then of the secondary pass catchers, like, you're kind of rolling with Kelsey at this point. But other than that, I'm waiting to see what Hollywood Brown does before I am fully locking that guy into my fantasy roster. Also on Saturday afternoon, it is the Pittsburgh Steelers taking on the Baltimore Ravens. Ravens favored by 6.5 points in this game. The total is between 44.5 and 45.5. I think that this is a bit of an overreaction to what we have seen the last couple of weeks. Specifically last week, Baltimore's offense looked really good against the Giants, and Pittsburgh certainly took a step back against the Philadelphia Eagles. But Baltimore's defense is not as good as Philadelphia's is. And Mike Tomlin has had the secret formula against Lamar Jackson for a little bit now. And it sounds like TJ Watt is going to be back in the lineup for the Steelers. He's healthy and ready to go. I was surprised to see how big this number was. I think that the Steelers honestly have a good chance of winning this game straight up, just based on how good their defense is. And how I think their offense, even though they have struggled to move the ball, admittedly, they have struggled to move the ball without George Pickens, who apparently is not going to be in the lineup again this week. I still think that Baltimore's defense has shown to be vulnerable enough that I think Pittsburgh can take advantage of it. And so this one, sorry, just hit the microphone there. This one is going to be a pick that we click on. We are going to go Pittsburgh plus the 6.5 points, and we'll probably give that money line a nice little sprinkle as the weekend goes on. From a fantasy standpoint, I mean, look, I know I just went over Tomlin against Lamar and all that. You're not sitting Lamar Jackson in the fantasy semifinals. You are simply not doing that. Nor are you sitting Derrick Henry, even though last week didn't go quite the way you would have wanted it to. And this week is against, again, very good run defense over with the Pittsburgh Steelers. So yes, there are concerns there for sure, but you have to play those guys at this point. For Pittsburgh, I think like Freiermuth is a good option at tight end this week. Russell, I wouldn't go there at quarterback, but I think Najee and Jalen Warren both have all right weeks, so I think you can start with those guys. On to the Sunday slate. It is the Rams taking on the Jets. Total is between 45.5 and 46.5. Rams again favored by 3. Look, it was cool that the Jets were able to get it back on track against Jacksonville. That is one of the worst teams in the league. Now, the Rams defense, aside from Thursday night against San Francisco, has not been spectacular. So there is an opportunity for the Jets to be able to put up some points on this Rams defense. But I think giving Sean McVay 10 days to get ready for whatever it is that the New York Jets are doing on defense now, I think there is a very good possibility that this offense puts up some points this week. So from a fantasy standpoint, you're starting everybody, I think. But from a footballing standpoint, I again am a little surprised at how close this line is. So I'm going to go Rams minus the 3 and feel very comfortable about that from a clicking standpoint, we will say. From a fantasy football perspective, I'm not putting my fate in the hands of Aaron Rodgers. It's just been too inconsistent at a quarterback spot. I do think that he has been good enough that, again, Adams is a must-play, Wilson is a must-play, and Breece Hall, disappointing this year, but I think he's still good to go. For the Rams, I do think you can trust Matthew Stafford this week. And I do think while the Gardner matchup is concerning, you don't know who he is going to be on with Puka and with Cooper Kupp. And while it can be very concerning to throw Cooper back into the lineup after the double bagel last week, I think you kind of got to roll with him and just, feel okay about that, because he is just too talented to not be able to go off in that spot. Philadelphia taking on the Washington Commanders. The Eagles favored by 3.5 points. Total is at 45.5. I should say, we've talked about this a little bit before. It doesn't quite have the variance of last week, but there is a lot out there in terms of different lines on different sites and at different shops and all of that. So I will once again say that line shopping is a very, very good thing and can be very helpful. And it helped us out last week here. Philadelphia taking on Washington, like I said, favored by 3.5 points. Eagles seem to have found their groove. That was an impressive performance against Pittsburgh last week. For Washington, it does seem like it is starting to fade a little bit more. Now, they were out to a convincing start last week, and then it just kind of stopped from there. I think now Vic Fangio having a second opportunity to take a look at Jaden Daniels, I think the Eagles defense comes away with this one. So once again, this is another one that I have a bit of confidence in. The old billions, I am not unsure. Although this one isn't as slanderous, obviously, as that was certainly implied on that show. But I am going to go Philly minus the 3.5 points. I just think offensively, they're going to be able to put up some numbers against this Washington defense that's been playing over their heads all season long. And defensively, I think the Eagles, they have seen this before. They are going to be very comfortable with it. And I think they're going to be able to take advantage of a very young still Washington Commanders football team. That being said, again, if you are at this point in fantasy football, you are here because of Jaden Daniels. So I just think you have to go with him at this point. The running back Robinson has been great. I think you go with that. And McLaurin, like you're starting your studs on the Washington side. And same with the Eagles. Like I think that this is a game where Hurts eats and Saquon Barkley is good and AJ Brown is good. Like you're starting your big guys in this particular matchup. Not a lot of big guys in this one. Arizona taking on the Carolina Panthers. The Cardinals are favored by 7 points in this game with a total between 47.5 and 49. This spread feels a little bit high. I understand why, given the struggles of Carolina last week, but that one, we're not going to give Carolina too much of the benefit of the doubt, obviously. But we do, I think, have to recognize that this team was objectively playing quite a bit better than they were last week before that off game against Dallas. And while Dallas's defense has not been great this year, they're better than Arizona's defense, I would say. And so I think you can feel a little bit comfortable with Carolina in this spot. And honestly, Arizona's offense has not been this wagon that a lot of us thought it was going to be coming into the season. And so I don't at all have the confidence to click on this bad boy, but I am going to pick Carolina plus the 7. I think Arizona wins this game, but I do think that they're going to be able to keep it close just because some issues they have on defense and the offense not necessarily firing on all cylinders all season long. From a fantasy standpoint, again, the matchup is too tantalizing to pass up if you have Kyler Murray in the fantasy playoffs, so I think you roll with that. James Conner is a beast. McBride is just so talented. He's not getting the touchdowns this year, but boy, is he good. So you obviously are rolling with them. At this point, Marvin Harrison Jr., sitting him against Carolina would be a bold move, but if you're at this point, I think you are here because you have other options and better options, so you're probably rolling with them. On the Carolina side, it's Hubbard, for sure. And then after that, I don't know. Given what we saw last week, I would have a tough time. I mean, honestly, if you have Bryce Young, given what we saw last week, you're probably not. This is probably not a decision that you are burdened with because you're probably done. Or you had a better option anyway. So I would be surprised and would be very hesitant to roll back with this guy as my starting quarterback again in fantasy football for this game. Anything else? Yeah, we don't. The pass catchers, I don't think I would trust them right now. Tennessee taking on the Indianapolis Colts. The Colts are favored by 3.5 points. The total is at 42.5. There's not a lot to this game. We don't need to spend a whole lot of time on this. The Tennessee Titans, they are going with Mason Rudolph, which actually probably is an upgrade at this point on offense. Defensively, they have talented players, but they have been gashed quite a bit lately. I do wonder about the give a shit meter for this team at this point. On the Colts side, they are still trying to figure out what Anthony Richardson is. Get in line. And defensively, it is a very bland approach and a very predictable one, albeit one that does get some results at some times. So at this point, I think the Colts are still trying. So I'm going to go with them minus 3.5. But there is not one world where I am putting any sort of an investment down on anything that they have in that game. From a fantasy standpoint, neither quarterback, that's obvious. I mean, maybe if you are desperate, the pass-catching options in Indianapolis and Calvin Ridley all have quite a bit of talent. And so those are pretty good wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 flex options for you. I have concerns about this just being an ugly game where no one is completing anything. I do think, like Jonathan Taylor, obviously, if he can just hold on to the ball for an extra beat, he's a very good running back. And Tony Pollard, you're concerned a little bit about him getting banged up the way that it went down last week. Him getting banged up, exiting the game, Tyjae Spears takes over, and they just kind of see what they have in the younger running back. I have real concerns about that, but Pollard has been so good, and the matchup's pretty good, that I think you kind of just got to roll with those cats at this point. Detroit taking on the Chicago Bears. The Lions favored by 4.5 points in this game, with the total, a proper total, finally, 47.5 to 50.5. I understand why this line is as low as it is. I think that this game is going to give people some false hope that all of our concerns about the Detroit defense are going to be unfounded. Like, I think that is going to be, I don't know if it's going to be A block, but it'll definitely be B block on a lot of the talking head shows on that are still going on Monday, because this Chicago offensive line is atrocious, and they have shown some signs at times of like Caleb and the offense figuring out at least how to work around it. But against Detroit, against this defense that, yes, significantly shorthanded, when you're signing guys off of Jacksonville's practice squad, things are not going awesome for you. But they are well coached enough that I think they can take advantage of the significant limitations on the Chicago side of the football. And so I think that Detroit, even against a very good Chicago defense, I think Detroit's defense is really going to give some problems for Chicago. So I like the Lions in this spot. I like them minus 4.5. And I think, honestly, I think a lot of people after this game are going to be talking about, I guess I didn't really finish that thought. The talking head shows are going to be, hey, you know what? We were overreacting to Detroit's defensive woes. Look at how hard that Dan Campbell's coaching them up. They got this. This defense isn't actually going to be a problem. We were all worried about it being a problem. This defense isn't going to be a problem. They figured it out. And I just think this is going to be a game that fools a lot of people. So just remember, do not let what we see on Sunday against Chicago change how you view this defense, because Chicago's offensive line is Swiss cheese and their offense is kind of doo-doo. And I honestly let people think that Detroit is still the best team in the NFC, and then maybe a little bit of a sprinkle on the Eagles or your other NFC team of choice as NFC champions this year. From a fantasy standpoint, I think I made it fairly obvious. I'm not really trusting any Chicago Bears right now. On the Detroit side, Goff, I think at this point, just because of how well that offense is going, you kind of got to start him. I think Jahmyr Gibbs has a real opportunity to step up in a gigantic way for this team with no David Montgomery. And then the pass catchers, like, I just, this offense is so good. I don't know if you get to the semifinals and just sit them because of what they have been doing. But yeah, like in Detroit in this game. Giants taking on the Atlanta Falcons. Falcons favored by 9 points, total between 42.5 and 44.5. Since we last spoke, Kirk Cousins is no longer the starting quarterback of the Atlanta Falcons, stating, well, I don't think I've forgotten how to play football, which everyone else in the entire world is the Tim Robbins meme of, you sure? You sure about that? Because it certainly seems like he has, because it's been very bad. So Michael Penix takes over. I think a lot of people are maybe overestimating the impact that Michael Penix Jr. can have immediately. I know we all made the jokes that the Atlanta Falcons drafted a seasoned veteran, but this is a kid playing in his first National Football League game. And what did we see at the beginning of this season? All the rookies struggled. Every single one of them, the whole lot of them, had some issues to start the season. And then you got a bit more familiar and a bit more familiar, and you work your way in. Why are we expecting this to be different? The kids just sat for 13 weeks. More than that, 15 weeks. And oh, well, he's been learning and all of that. It's like, oh yeah, no, this looks like it has been a phenomenal learning experience. See, I guess you've seen what you shouldn't do at the quarterback spot with what Kirk Cousins has done. But that I don't know if sitting under the Kirk Cousins learning tree is necessarily going to give you all the value that you think it is going to. So I think we're overvaluing this a little bit. And I think this line being as big as it is more of a statement on the New York Giants than it is that of the Atlanta Falcons. But I don't think it's this bad. So again, not going to stake anything on this at all. But from a just making picks standpoint, we are going to go with the Atlanta Falcons. We're going to go with all that. We're going to pick the Falcons. We're going to go with the Jets. Or Giants, sorry. I'll get the right team eventually. Gonna go with the Giants, plus the 9. From a fantasy standpoint, don't. Seeing some people pick up Michael Penix, I pray to God that is just let's just see for next week. In most spots, I am assuming that is what that is. Because there are quite a few weapons on this team. Darnell Mooney just cost me Toxic's favorite player, Darnell Mooney, because that did not go well for me with him on Monday Night Football with the nice little 0. Yeah, that sucked. So I don't know if I'd be if you don't trust him this week, don't blame you. I do think you kind of have to roll with London. You have to roll with Bijan. There are certainly worlds where I'm trusting Tyler Algier this week because he's so good. He doesn't get the volume, but in quite deep leagues, I think you can roll with him for sure. And the Kyle Pitts thing, again, like rookie quarterbacks tend to look at the tight end a little bit more because they're close, but it's just been so bad with Pitts. If you have him, you're probably starting him. On the Giants side, you guys know, it's neighbors. It may be Tracy if you have him and don't have better options, and that is certainly it. Cleveland taking on the Cincinnati Bengals. Bengals favored by 7.5 with the total sitting between 45.5 and 46.5. Again, I don't think we need to go a whole lot into this game. Dorian Thompson-Robinson, or whatever his name is going for the Cleveland Browns. Nick Chubb is out. Jerome Ford is in. For Cincinnati, they are off to a historic run on the offensive side of things and can't stop a nosebleed on defense, which is why this game doesn't really matter at all. Cincinnati is competing for a playoff spot still by math, but doesn't really feel like they are locked into this thing by any stretch of the imagination. So I don't think we need to spend a whole lot of time on this game. Cleveland's bad. Cincinnati's bad, except for on the offensive side, where I think they're going to do awful things to the Browns. So I think Cincinnati wins this game. It's a big number. Don't love 7.5. But that is certainly the way we are going to go with Cincinnati minus the 7.5. And honestly, I do think that's going to be something that we click on. In fantasy, I think DTR takes down a lot of the fantasy value for a Jerry Jeudy. I do think there's going to be a lot of volume in this game, though. I think that this ends up being pretty high scoring because neither defense, again, any good at all. So Jeudy has worked his way into kind of being a number 1 fantasy option. I think even if you take it a step down, he is still going to be a serviceable flex consideration on a number of teams. And Jerome Ford, again, getting a ton of volume, I think is going to be pretty good for Cleveland. On the Cincinnati side, you're starting everybody, right? Like that. We know this at this point. You're starting your Bengals because this offense is an absolute wagon. Minnesota taking on Seattle, one of the games of the day on Sunday. The Vikings favored by 3 points. Total sitting between 42 and 42.5. The health of Geno Smith, obviously huge in this game, but even if he is healthy, I think we saw last week in just right in front of God and everybody how bad that offensive line is. And Minnesota's defense, I think with Brian Flores, is going to be good enough that they're going to be able to really take advantage of it. I do expect a bit of a bounce back from Seattle on the defensive side of things against this against this Minnesota offense that does really seem like it is clicking right now. But I think that I still have hope on the Seattle side defensively that this is a good defense. I'm going to be stubborn about that. But right now, that this is oversimplifying things. I don't think Seattle's as good as Minnesota. So I think you just roll with the Vikings because, like, right now, Sam Darnold's playing better than Geno Smith. Aaron Jones is playing better than Kenneth Walker. Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison are playing better than DK, JSN, and Tyler Lockett right now. Vikings defense playing better. Offensive line significantly better. Not even close. So I just think everywhere you go down, it is check, 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 check for Minnesota against Seattle in a home field that isn't as much of an advantage as it used to be. So again, another one, too many clicks. I'm going to say too many clicks this week, but we are going to go Minnesota minus the 3 in that game. San Francisco taking on Miami. Fantasy football standpoint in that game. It would be, you're not trusting Geno Smith, I don't think, this week. I think that part's pretty clear. Sam Darnold does seem like he is on a bit of a roll. So if you've been rolling with him, I think you can keep going with it. And I think you're starting pretty well everyone, right? Like the backfield out in Seattle, Charbonnet dealing with an injury now as well. I know I mentioned Walker before. I know he's been hurt for a little bit. You're starting all your Vikings. I think I made that point pretty clear. And then the pass catchers on Seattle are too good to not have in your lineup with your season on the line in the semifinals. All right, now, San Francisco, Miami. Dolphins favored by a point. Total is at 44.5. These are two teams that had high expectations coming into this year, and this game was likely expected to be a primetime amazing matchup, and it's not right now. You have a lot of injuries on the San Francisco side. Miami, with the injury to Tua earlier in the year, has dug a hole that they cannot dig out of. I genuinely don't know. This is the second week in a row with Miami where you are looking at a team that, yeah, you know what? They can beat bad teams, but they struggle against good teams. And you look at the opposition, it's like, well, are they? And I still think there is a good team there in San Francisco. And so I think that San Fran does get the job done and does come away with a victory in this game. From a fantasy standpoint, the big intrigue here is that Garendo appears to be out. So Patrick Taylor Jr. is going to step into the lineup in the running back role. I try to pick him up everywhere because there is, I think, going to be a lot of volume in this San Francisco offense for the running backs. In terms of pass catchers, Debo has been very difficult to trust. But if you still have him, and if you have him and you're still playing, I think you roll with it. Same with Jennings, and obviously same with Kittle. On the Miami side, again, you know what you're doing on Miami. Smith, HN, Hill, Waddle, you roll with them. Jacksonville taking on the Vegas Raiders. Raiders favored by a point, total between 39.5 and 40.5, and we've already spent too long talking on this game. Both these teams are terrible. I have genuinely no idea about any way to handicap this game other than to say it is going to be awful, and I'm going to take the under. Even though neither defense can stop anyone, I trust the defenses to stop people more than I'm trusting the offenses to not be stopped. So, under 40.5. From a fantasy standpoint, if you're starting anyone in this game, you're insane. Only kinda. Brock Bowers is so good, you have to. Trevor Lawrence, God, you wish, right? Like, this would be the spot, you would think. But it hasn't been there this year. The running backs, they split enough time, but honestly, I think Bigsby is probably a play again this week for this group. And pass catchers, Brian Thomas Jr., I think you have to roll with him. Mac Jones, obviously, sorry, I said Trevor Lawrence before. It's obviously not him. Again, you would wish he would be in this spot, but it's Mac Jones at quarterback. He obviously is just a Thomas. That is his focus right now. Now, 12 targets go to Strange this week, and so if you're desperate, which almost everyone is a tight end, I think you go with that. For the Raiders, it is Bowers, and it is seriously nobody else. New England taking on the Buffalo Bills. Bills favored by 13.5 points, total 46.5. Buffalo has just been absolutely running through teams lately, and I see no reason why that can't continue in this game. Drake May has been good as a rookie quarterback, but he has not been hanging with Josh Allen at Orchard Park good. Buffalo is going to just steamroll these guys, I think. Bills by 13.5. Fantasy standpoint, you're starting your Bills and not your Patriots. And I feel pretty good that the Buffalo Bills defense is a good start this week. Waiting all day for Sunday night. Not the most inspiring Sunday night football game. This one is honestly you know what? Significant other. We watched football on Thursday. We had, I know, it came out of nowhere on Saturday when we're trying to get our Christmas shopping done. There was football all day on Saturday. Sunday night, this is just, it's us. You know, it's us. I'm not even going to watch Sunday night football. As it's the Buccaneers taking on the Dallas Cowboys. Tampa Bay favored by 2.5 points, which honestly seems a little insulting. Total is at 48.5 to 49.5. Look, it's awesome that Dallas had a resurgence against Carolina. And it is great that Cooper Rush is playing maybe a little bit better than the dreadful that we were expecting. They are not less than a field goal away from being the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And yeah, Tampa Bay's defense has some issues. And Baker wasn't overly inspiring for some of that game against the Chargers until he just woke up and started taking over. But Dallas's defense is not the LA Chargers. I think that Tampa Bay comes up with a very strong performance here. So I am loving getting Tampa Bay minus the 2.5 in this spot. Give me them all day long in their minus 2.5 against the Cowboys. From a fantasy football standpoint, Baker, I think you can trust this week. The running backs, Irving, banged up. Check on the health status. White, roll with him. Mike Evans, obviously. The pressure point, I think, comes with Jalen McMillan. He's got 3 touchdowns in the last 2 games. I do think you can trust him this week against the Dallas Cowboys. On the Cowboys side, it feels like a cake matchup, but I don't think that you're changing much of your strategy. We're not rushing out to pick up Brandon Cooks. We're not rushing out to pick up Cooper Rush with our fantasy season on the line. It is CeeDee and Dowdle, and that is it. And then Monday Night Football. It is the Packers taking on the New Orleans Saints. Green Bay favored by 14 points with a total 42.5. Alvin Kamara apparently going to be out for this game, so the injury bug continues to be a problem out in New Orleans. Green Bay does feel like they have figured some things out now on the offensive side of the football. That was a pretty impressive performance against Seattle last week. The defense you still have some concerns with, but that is not a concern for this game, as New Orleans' offense is going with Spencer Rattler because he's an upgrade. That's where this team is at right now. This comes down to one team's good, one team isn't. Are they 2 touchdowns better? Probably. New Orleans, again, with all the injuries they have right now, is pretty consistently trotting out one of the worst rosters in the NFL on a week-in, week-out basis. So it's going to be Green Bay that we're taking here. Even minus the 14. I'll give up 2 touchdowns. That's fine. From a fantasy standpoint, Jordan Love is a quarterback we're rocking with this week. The wide receiver options are just so unpredictable that it becomes very difficult to trust any of them with your season on the line. But Josh Jacobs is a smash start this week. On New Orleans, because of the injuries, it's tough to trust really any of them. Juwan Johnson, I think at tight end, if you're desperate, is fine. Kendre Miller should at least be rostered. If you have the cojones to wait all the way until Monday to really get a sense of if Alvin Kamara is out or not, by all means, roll with Kendre Miller, because I think he's actually going to have an all right game here against the Green Bay Packers. So that's it. The entire week in the NFL previewed here on Couch Potato Diary.